GT3 prices are a hot topic among value-conscious car enthusiasts, and there's no shortage of people who think that values will go to the moon or come crashing down. The truth though, to be honest, is much less exciting, with exception of one generation. That's typically a bad thing to say in a YouTube video, but I'm sure you will appreciate it if you're trying to find out what's actually happening in the GT3 market. In this video we'll dive into the latest GT3 price trends for all generations. We'll mainly focus on the US market, but we'll also look at the German one. If we start with the 992 in the US market, we can see that prices are much lower than 2 years ago. They decreased drastically during 2022. In 2023 though, the market entered a new phase, one of stability. You can see that they are indeed getting cheaper, but that it took more than a year for prices to drop from $270,000 to $260,000. Last year's decrease is then also small, at 2%. Adding the touring to the plot, we can see that the initial drop was much higher, but that this difference disappeared from July 2023 onwards. Last year they lost 4.5%, a bit more than the non-touring version. Yet, I wouldn't read too much into the differences. Both changes aren't statistically confirmed, meaning that they could be the result of chance. Now I frequently get asked about the differences between the automatics and the manuals. Usually I don't include them because there's no difference in the price trend. This also applies to the 992 GT3. Over here we have in orange the non-touring version and in blue the automatics. You can see that the manuals demand a premium, but that the development over time is basically the same as in the automatic market. As we saw, the 992 market has been very stable since 2023 and only displayed minor declines. The same applies to the 991s. In orange we have the price trend for the .2s and in blue for the .1s. You can see that the prices mainly moved in parallel. A big increase during the pandemic and a decline. And a relative stable development since 2023. .1s have been hovering between $140,000 and $145,000 and .2s between $191,000 and $198,000. Naturally, the price changes compared to last year are small. .2s lost 2% or $4,000. For .1s this is 5.9%. But the mileage development during the last 3 months is atypical, meaning that a lot of high mileage cars are put up for sale. Correcting for this, we arrive at a minus of 4.5% or $7,000. Now based on the last few months, the .2 prices appear to be slightly stronger. Cars that weren't driven even increased in price. It's difficult to say if this is due to the engine issues in the .1 cars or something else, but it is something to keep an eye on. Let's continue with the 997. A word of warning is required though, especially the 997.2 market is extremely small. Sometimes only 1 or 2 cars are listed for sale, so this means that the trend needs to be interpreted with care. In orange we have the .2 and in blue the .1s. Similar to what we saw before, prices have been stable or even increasing. .1s are up by 8.8% compared to last year and .2s by 13.5%. Yet, both changes aren't statistically confirmed. They could be the result of chance, especially given the small market sizes. Hence, please be cautious when using these numbers. Alright, so far it has been a bit of a good news show for owners. Prices have been stable or have been falling at extremely low rates. Value-conscious 996 owners though need to keep a good eye on the market. The 996 topped the depreciation leaderboard for a long time. Values didn't correct after the pandemic price top. They just continued to rise, putting the 996 into an elite category of cars. Now though, as you can see, we can start to see some price weakness. Prices have been extremely stable between July 23 and April 24. But dipped between April and June. They decreased by 7.8% or $13,500. This increased weakness originates from cars which didn't sell during the last 3 months. 4 of them were discounted by an average rate of 9%. Now this could be of course a temporary effect. 996 GT3s usually sell slowly, but unsold cars are reduced by 1 to 5% only. The 9% drop is a clear outlier. If the downward trend is confirmed in the next market update, we could be looking at a serious correction. But that's not all. No. For value-conscious owners, this development is especially worrisome because it's also happening in other, similar markets. 360s and F430s also belong to the elite group of cars for which prices didn't decrease after the pandemic price stop, or did only so by a small amount. However, also these two models experienced a significant slowdown in the prices. Values dropped by 13.8 and 10.2% respectively. This is surprisingly similar to the drop in the 996 GT3 market.
Alright, let's put the data together now and put the price changes into context.
Over here we have the year-over-year changes that we just talked about in dark blue. For context, I also added the year-over-year changes for April and January. This reveals what we already talked about before. The GT3 market, in general, is very strong and stable at the moment. 992 and 991.2s lost only 2%, and they have been losing relatively little for quite some time now. Also, .1s are doing relatively well at minus 4.5%. This is slightly higher than 3 months ago, but bear in mind that there is some randomness involved in these numbers, even after applying some corrections. Big changes though can be observed in the 996 and 997 market. As discussed before, changes in the 997 market need to be interpreted with immense care. The increase in depreciation rate in the 996 market though represents a statistically significant change. The decrease is unlikely to be the result of chance. Moreover, it fits in the long-term pattern. Since January, the rate has been increasing.
The conclusions also hold if we compare them to the rest of the market.
Over here we have the US year-over-year price changes for almost all cars that feature on my channel. On the horizontal axis we have the price change compared to last year in percentages, and on the vertical axis we have the number of cars to which this change applies. The average decrease during last year was 7%, and most cars lost between 11 and 2%. If I plot the 997, 991 and 997 in here, it becomes evident that the GT3 market outperformed other markets, especially when it comes to the 992 and 991s. Newer cars tend to lose more than the average, so the 992s and 991s losing less than the average is a great result if you're an owner. 996 though lost marginally more than the average, a strange, surprising result, given the stable price history and the age of the car.
Prices though are of course only one of the many data points we can look at to get a sense of the market strength. Another important data point is the inventory level. It's perhaps a little bit detailed, but key to consider if you want to understand what's happening in the GT3 market. Let me show you.
Over here we have the development in the carried over inventory, that is, cars that didn't sell within 3 months. The higher the number, the longer the cars are spending with sellers. Looking at the developments, we can see that 996s typically take a long time to sell, as more than 50% of the cars, or more, isn't sold within 3 months. 992s and 991s on the other hand have been selling extremely quickly, at 20 to 30%. The development is also much more stable due to the market size. The 997 is down, something that matches with the stable or increasing prices, but uncertainty in the estimates is also high.
Now of course, if it takes a long time to sell the car, it doesn't mean that the market is weak per definition. There's a lot of variation between the different segments. However, what happens to the price when the car doesn't sell does tell us something about the market strength.
Over here we have the price changes for these unsold cars. A value above 0 means that sellers have an extremely high confidence in the market. They increase the price even when the car doesn't sell. The opposite of course applies to negative values. Looking at the trends, we can see that 991s and 992s are hardly discounted when they don't sell. Sellers know that demand is high and that they will sell them anyway. Typically, they're discounted by 0 to 2% depending on the season. The same used to apply to 996s. But look what happened during the last few months. Discount rates increased tremendously. We saw before that 50% of the cars didn't sell, and now we can see that they have been discounted by an average rate of 9%. Signaling a weakening market. As we discussed before, it will be interesting to see if this downward momentum continues.
Now so far we talked about the US market. Most of my viewers are from the US, but the group of European viewers is growing steadily. So let's have a look at the German market as well. The differences between the two markets can be enormous.
Over here we have the most recent yearly changes in the US market, so the ones we just saw, and the ones in the German market. The German numbers are based on the changes between November and July, but adjusted for the missing 3 months, so keep in mind that these numbers are preliminary. we can see that, on average, the German market has been more stable. GT3s decreased by 1% only, versus 4.1% in the US market. The weakening in the US 996 market, for example, isn't visible in Germany. 996 prices increased by 4.4%. This development is more in line with what we used to see in the US. Also in the 997 market, there are enormous differences, but we need to remember that the US results aren't statistically significant. Looking at the 991s, we can see that the rates are basically the same for the .1s and that the .2s lost less than the .1s in both countries. In Germany, they didn't lose anything at all. The 992, on the other hand, lost a bit more in Germany than in the US. They dropped by 6.2%, so 4.2 percentage points more than in the US. Let's include a bit more detail. Over here we have the US trend in dollars and the German trend in euros. This clearly shows a slight difference in slope. Note that the mileage increase and average age of the car is similar in both markets, making this difference even more interesting. Of course, more data is needed to tie any hard conclusions to the difference, but I wanted to show you what the conclusions could be. More about this in the next GT3 market update.
Let's wrap up and conclude. The majority of the GT3 market is behaving in a stable way, in which prices are falling by small amounts or not at all. Most generations lost between 2.5 and 4% during last year. 997s were stable or even increased. Great news if you're a value-conscious owner.
The 996 though is shaking up the market. A severe drop of 7.8% represents a break with the historical trend, but does align with the sudden drops in the 360 and F430 markets. The big question is, of course, if this drop will continue.
Now we of course only looked at descriptive numbers. They have some predictive power regarding the short-term price development, but they cannot predict the long-term price development.
If you own a 996 and care about values, I think it's worthwhile to monitor the market closely.
And with that we arrived at the end of this video. Now if you enjoy this data-driven way of analyzing car markets, but would like to see a video for a different car, head over to my channel. Over there you'll find data-driven market updates for a large variety of cars. Can't find the car you're looking for? Let me know the name of the car by commenting it down below in the comment section. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I'll make a video about it. As always, thank you for watching and I hope to see you in 2 weeks for a fresh market update.